So now it's time to start on chapter 2. And chapter 2 is called Black Dog Appears and Disappears. Okay. This is still in part 1, the old buccaneer. So it probably still has a little bit to do with the man now we know as the captain, quote unquote. And he's staying at the Admiral Benbow Inn, where Jim is the narrator. He's a young boy, and it's Jim's family's inn. All right. So last we checked in with them, the old pirate had tried to get in a little bit of a fight with a doctor named Dr. Livesey, and Dr. Livesey threatened him to, bring up charges against him because he's a magistrate, which is like a judge. Okay, that's what happened in the last chapter. So now we're moving on to that. Make sure that you have your sheet with you for the summary and for any of the notes that you're about to take so that we can talk about those at the end of the chapter. All right, here we go. Oh, and before I start, just remember, I'm in my house. So is my whole family. Just like with you, you may not be able to get out and go and do other things in other places very much these days. And so understand we may have an interruption or two during the readings of these chapters, and we'll just go with the flow as best we can. Okay, here we go. Black Dog appears and disappears. It was not very long after this that there occurred the first of the mysterious events that rid us at last of the captain, though not, as you will see, of his affairs. It was a bitter, cold winter with long, hard frosts and heavy gales, and it was plain from the first that my poor father was little likely to see the spring. He sank daily, and my mother and I had all the inn upon our hands, and were kept busy enough without paying much regard to our unpleasant guest. It was one January morning very early, a pinching, frosty morning, the cove all gray with hoarfrost, the ripple lapping softly on the stones, and the sun still low and only touching the hilltops and shining far to seaward. The captain had risen earlier than usual and set out down the beach, his cutlass swinging under the broad skirts of the old blue coat, his brass telescope under his arm, his hat tilted back upon his head. I remember his breath hanging like smoke in his wake as he strode off, and the last sound I heard of him as he turned the big rock was a loud snort of indignation, as though his mind was still running upon Dr. Livesey. That's a lot of description, so take note of that, what he looked like. There's some words in here, like cutlass, that come up a little bit more often. A cutlass is a kind of a sword, and you often see a pirate with a cutlass. It's kind of a curved blade. It's more of a chopping blade than some swords are, because one side of it is the sharp side, okay? And then there's also, it talks about it's like a frosty morning, but it talks about hoarfrost, and hoarfrost is the kind that kind of sticks up. It's like spiky frost. So it's kind of an interesting time, an interesting description here. Well, Mother was upstairs with Father, and I was laying the breakfast table against the captain's return when the parlor door opened and a man stepped in on whom I had never set my eyes before. He was a pale, tallowy creature, wanting 2 fingers of the left hand, and though he wore a cutlass, he did not look much like a fighter. I had always my eye open for seafaring men with 1 leg or 2, and I remembered this one puzzled me. He was not sailorly, and yet he had a smack of the sea about him too. Okay, says he's wanting of 2 fingers, which means he's missing 2 fingers on his hand. Maybe those 2, I don't know, okay? All right. I asked him what was for his service, and he said he would take rum, but as I was going out of the room to fetch it, he sat down upon a table and motioned me to draw near. I paused where I was, with my napkin in my hand. "Come here, Sonny," says he. "Come nearer here." I took a step nearer. "Is this here table for my mate Bill?" he asked with a kind of leer. I told him I did not know his mate Bill, and this was for a person who stayed in our house whom we called the captain. "Well," said he, "my mate Bill would be called the captain as like as not. He has a cut on one cheek and a mighty pleasant way with him, particularly in drink, has my mate Bill. We'll put it for argument like, that your captain has a cut on one cheek, and we'll put it, if you like, that that cheek's the right one. Ah, well, I told you. Now, is my mate Bill in this here house?" I told him he was out walking. "Which way, Sonny? Which way is he gone?" And when I had pointed out the rocks and told him how the captain was likely to return and how soon, and answered a few other questions, "Ah," said he, "this'll be good as drink to my mate Bill." The expression of his face as he said these words was not at all pleasant. And I had my own reasons for thinking that the stranger was mistaken, even supposing he meant what he said. But it was no affair of mine, I thought, and besides, it was difficult to know what to do. The stranger kept hanging about just inside the inn door, peering round the corner like a cat waiting for a mouse. Once I stepped out myself into the road, but he immediately called me back, and as I did not obey quick enough for his fancy, a most horrible change came over his tallowy face, and he ordered me in with an oath that made me jump. Okay, first I want to tell you about tallowy and oath. Tallow, which has come up a couple times, means kind of waxy and maybe kind of yellowish too. Like wax that candles were made out of, tallow, had a kind of a pale yellow color to it and would be waxy. A tallowy complexion wouldn't be a very good one. Okay. Oh, and then when he says an oath, oaths are basically cursing. When it says he said an oath or they make an oath or something, it's not like, because usually when we hear the word oath, we think it's like a promise. Like, I give my oath, right? I swear. When they do it, they're swearing, like cursing, okay? All right, let me find my spot here. As soon as I was back again, he returned to his former manner, half fawning, half sneering, patted me on the shoulder, told me I was a good boy, and he had taken quite a fancy to me. "I have a son of my own," he said he, "as like you as 2 blocks, and he's all the pride of my heart. But the great thing for boys is discipline, sonny. Discipline. Now, if you had sailed along of Bill, you wouldn't have stood there to be spoke to twice, not you. That was never Bill's way, nor the way if sich a sailed with him. And here, sure enough, is my mate Bill, with a spyglass under his arm. Bless his old art, to be sure. You and me'll just go back into the parlor, sonny, and get behind the door, and we'll give Bill a little surprise. Bless his art, I say again." Okay, so understand that situation. Jim, the boy, had gone out into the road to see if the captain was coming. And Black Dog, you don't know that's his name yet, but that is Black Dog. Spoiler alert. Okay, Black Dog tells him to get, to come with, and he doesn't immediately answer. And so Black Dog grabs him and is kind of mean to him. And he gets scared. And then he's like, "Oh, you remind me of my son, just like him. I really," he seems like he changes his attitude again. And he says, "Well, if you'd ever sailed with Bill, you wouldn't be questioning you would just jump when you were told." So he gives us a little information about Bill too, and about the fact that he sailed with Bill and that he knows Bill's behaviors. And there's a lot of information just kind of being hinted at here. Okay. So saying, the stranger backed along with me into the parlor and put me behind him in the corner, so that we were both hidden by the open door. I was very uneasy and alarmed, as you may fancy, and it rather added to my fears to observe that the stranger was certainly frightened himself. He cleared the hilt of his cutlass and loosened the blade in the sheath, and all the time we were waiting there, he kept swallowing, as if he felt that what we used to call a lump in the throat. At last, in strode the captain, slammed the door behind him without looking to the right or left, and marched straight across the room to where his breakfast awaited him. "Bill," said the stranger in a voice that I thought he had tried to make bold and big. The captain spun round on his heel and fronted us. All the brown had gone out of his face, and even his nose was blue. He had the look of a man who sees a ghost, or the evil one, or something worse, if anything can be, and upon my word I felt sorry to see him all in a moment, turned so old and sick. "Come, Bill, you know me. You know an old shipmate, Bill, surely," said the stranger. The captain made a sort of gasp. "Black Dog," said he. "And who else?" returned the other, getting more at his ease. "Black Dog as ever was, come for to see his old shipmate Billy at the Admiral Benbow Inn. Ah, Bill, we have seen a sight of times, us two, since I lost them 2 talons," holding up his mutilated hand. Now look here, said the captain. You've run me down. Here I am. Well then, speak up. What is it? That's you, Bill, returned Black Dog. You're in the right of it, Billy. I have a glass of rum from this dear child here, as I've took such a liking to, and we'll sit down, if you please, and talk square like old shipmates. When I returned with the rum, they were already seated on either side of the captain's breakfast table. Black Dog next to the door and sitting sideways so as to have one eye on his old shipmate and one, as I thought, on his retreat. He bade me go and leave the door wide open. None of your keyholes for me, sonny, he said, and I left them together and retired into the bar. For a long time, though, I certainly did my best to listen. I could hear nothing but a low gattling, but at last the voice began to grow higher, and I could pick up a word or two, mostly oaths, from the captain. No, 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 and an end of it, he cried once, and again. If it comes to swinging, swing all, say I. Whenever they're talking about swinging, they're talking about being hung, like for punishment to death, right? Okay. Then all of a sudden, there was a tremendous explosion of oaths and other noises. The chair and table went over in a lump. A clash of steel followed, and then a cry of pain, and the next instant I saw Black Dog in full flight, and the captain hotly pursuing, both with drawn cutlasses, and the former streaming blood from his left shoulder. Former is always the one that is the first mentioned, and then latter, if it says latter, is this next, the last one mentioned. And so the first one mentioned was Black Dog, so that's the one who is bleeding, okay? Just at the door, the captain aimed at the fugitive one last tremendous cut, which would certainly have split him to the chin, another word for chin, had it not been intercepted by our big signboard of the Admiral Benbow. So he went to go slam his sword down on him, but it hit the sign instead of hitting the guy. You may see the notch in the lower side of the frame to this day. That blow was the last of the battle. Once out upon the road, Black Dog, in spite of his wound, showed a wonderful clean pair of heels and disappeared over the edge of the hill in half a minute. The captain, for his part, stood staring at the signboard like a bewildered man. Then he passed his hand over his eyes several times and at last turned back into the house. Jim, says he, rum. And as he spoke, he reeled a little and caught himself with one hand against the wall. Are you hurt? Cried I. Rum, he repeated. I must get away from here. Rum, rum. I ran to fetch it, but I was quite unsteadied by all that had fallen out. And I broke one glass and fouled the tap, and while I was still getting in my own way, I heard a loud fall in the parlor, and running in, beheld the captain lying full length upon the floor. At the same instant, my mother, alarmed by the cries and fighting, came running downstairs to help me. Between us, we raised his head. He was breathing very loud and hard, but his eyes were closed, and his face a horrible color. Dear, dearie me, cried my mother, what a disgrace upon the house, and your poor father sick. In the meantime, we had no idea what to do to help the captain, nor any other thought but that he had got his death hurt in the scuffle with the stranger. I got the rum, to be sure, and tried to put it down his throat, but his teeth were tightly shut, and his jaws as strong as iron. It was a happy relief for us when the door opened, and Dr. Livesey came in on his visit to my father. Oh, doctor, we cried, what shall we do? Where is he wounded? Wounded? A fiddlestick's end, said the doctor, no more wounded than you or I. The man has had a stroke, as I warned him. Now, Mrs. Hawkins, just you run upstairs to your husband and tell him, if possible, nothing about it. For my part, I must do my best to save this fellow's trebly worthless life. Jim, you get me a basin. The basin's like a big bowl. Okay. When I got back with the basin, the doctor had already ripped up the captain's sleeve and exposed his great sinewy arm. It was tattooed in several places. Here's luck, a fair wind, and Billy Bones his fancy were very neatly and clearly executed on the forearm. And up near the shoulder, there was a sketch of a gallows, which is like where they hang people, okay? And a man hanging from it, done, as I thought, with great spirit. So he's got a bunch of tattoos, so take note of what those are like, okay? Prophetic, said the doctor, touching this picture with his finger. And now, Master Billy Bones, if that be your name, we'll have a look at the color of your blood. Jim, he said, are you afraid of blood? No, sir, said I. Well then, said he, you hold the basin. And with that, he took his lancet and opened a vein. They used to do that a lot for medicine. It's called bloodletting. And it actually was very effective in some cases because it lowered your blood pressure. So if you were having something that had to do with high blood pressure, like a stroke, that it might offer almost immediate relief to the actual symptoms. So it's not generally something that we do anymore, but bloodletting was a very common practice back in the old days. So they actually were bleeding him out into a basin. Probably a dangerous thing to do too. A great deal of blood was taken before the captain opened his eyes and looked mistily about him. First, he recognized the doctor with an unmistakable frown. Then his glance fell upon me, and he looked relieved. But suddenly his color changed, and he tried to raise himself, crying, "Where's Black Dog?" "There's no black dog here," said the doctor, "except what you have on your own back. You have been drinking rum. You have had a stroke, precisely as I told you, and I have just, very much against my own will, dragged you head foremost out of the grave. Now, Mr. Bones," "That's not my name," he interrupted. "Much I care," returned the doctor. "It's the name of a buccaneer of my acquaintance, and I call you by it for the sake of shortness. And what I have to say to you is this: one glass of rum won't kill you, but if you take one, you'll take another, and I stake my wig if you don't break off short, you'll die. Do you understand that? Die, and go to your own place like the man in the Bible. Come now. Make an effort. I'll help you to your bed for once." Now he says a couple things that are interesting in here. First of all, he's just warning him that this habit that he's got, this alcohol habit, is adding to his chance of death, that he's going to die of what he's putting his body through right now. And he's telling him he has to stop drinking. But he also says something, "I'll stake my wig. I'll bet my wig." Now, to get you an idea of what this time period is like, this is like around the American Revolution time. So you think about the founding fathers, like George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, and they're wearing powdered wigs. Okay, so Dr. Livesey and other men who had money and nice outfits at the time, wigs were in fashion, and they often wore wigs, and sometimes they would be powdered wigs. And so when you're imagining Dr. Livesey when he's dressed up, that's what he'd be wearing. Now, they didn't wear it just every day, all day. They had regular hair, but they did wear wigs as kind of like a fashion. Okay. All right. So back at it. Between us, with much trouble, we managed to hoist him upstairs and laid him on his bed, where his head fell back on the pillow as if he were almost fainting. "Now, mind you," said the doctor, "I clear my conscience. The name of rum for you is death." And with that, he went off to see my father, taking me with him by the arm. "This is nothing," he said as soon as he had closed the door. "I have drawn blood enough to keep him quiet a while. He should lie for a week where he is. That is the best thing for him and you. But another stroke would settle them." And that's that for chapter 2. So look at your work packet. Look at what you need to do here. To really understand what you read and what I've read to you it means that you have to think back on what really stood out to you, what the major actions of the story are. You need to rewrite it in your own words. And that's what a summary really is. So think about it. What was the most important thing that happened? And really, there are two most important things that happen, but they're related. So first of all, he gets a visit from Black Dog. So you're going to want to put that in your own words. What happened with Black Dog? And it doesn't go well. We don't know everything that was said between them. We don't know why it doesn't go well. We don't know why he didn't want to see Black Dog. But something happens. And when he leaves, a combination of the stress of that meeting and the fact that he doesn't take very good care of himself health-wise, he had what the doctor called a stroke. And the doctor helps him at least a little bit so that he's still alive, but tells him he can't drink anymore and he needs to lie still. Okay, with that in mind, write your own summary in your own words, what just happened, and then predict what might happen next. The doctor's given you some ideas for a prediction, like what happens if he drinks? What happens if he doesn't lie still? What do you think happens if Black Dog returns? What do you think might happen to Jim's dad or Jim or the doctor? Okay, so write a prediction and fill up that space, and then think then, what is the author doing now? You know, he started the chapter with some fun description of the captain. And maybe that's something that we got a little bit more of too. We learned about his tattoos. We learned his name, or did we? Because he said it's not his name, but he has a tattoo of it. So Billy is probably his name. Okay. So think about what you did learn. And was this about the character? Was this like making it more intriguing what's going on? Because we don't know why Black Dog's a problem, or is Black Dog a problem? What's going on? Okay. So what did you like about this chapter? The violence, the tattoos, the medical knowledge. There's all kinds of things to like about this chapter. What did you wonder about? There's lots of words to wonder about, lots of ideas to wonder about. Maybe you wondered about that whole, who is Black Dog? Are they pirates? Are they both pirates? Okay. What was difficult? And yeah, some of this language is difficult. And I'm not going to explain all of it. Some of it you're going to have to kind of get by context clues. What does it mean when you put it in the whole context of the story? Can you kind of figure it out? Sometimes I'll stop and I'll explain things if I find them to be things that might add to the story to know them better. Otherwise, you might have to look up some words to help you understand the story better. If there's a part that I read and you still don't get it, and you read and you still don't get it, take some time to decode it a little bit. Find out the meanings of some words, go back and read it again. And then again, the most important thing when you're reading something that is difficult text is to not get hung up on the little things you don't know if you know the big thing. If you know the basic things that just happened in this chapter, then you're okay. If you need more understanding, then you're going to go online and you're going to look at what resources online that I've given you will help you with some summaries, some ideas of what each of these chapters mean, and then help you with your enjoyment of the story overall as well. Okay, I'll see you again later. That was chapter 2.